Hey, what's up everybody? Mike Lazarecki here. Today we're going to be talking about a photography-focused question. If you happen to be just starting out in photography and you're trying to figure out whether you should be shooting in JPEG or in RAW on your camera, this episode is meant to clarify the differences between the two and maybe a little bit about what you should and shouldn't be considering when you're making that decision. Personally, I shoot in RAW exclusively. I don't really ever shoot in JPEG. I used to shoot RAW plus JPEG, which is an option in many cameras. I don't do that anymore. I always process my photos and I prefer the flexibility that RAW gives me. But that's not necessarily to say that everybody's gonna feel the same way. So to get started, let's just talk about what the differences between RAW and JPEG are on a fundamental level. A JPEG image is basically an image that's already been processed inside of your camera. So what happens is you snap your shutter and the sensor captures the image. The computer inside your camera just goes and processes a specific look or color style baked into the file. It processes it, it decides what your highlights and shadow levels should be. Then you end up with an image that has a look baked in already, which is kind of nice if you're just trying to be able to take a picture and upload it right to social media. However, something to understand is that this is taking control away from you. So if you are trying to do something more creative with your photos, then a JPEG image is only going to limit you to what the computer in your camera decides to process it as. Does that make sense? I'm trying to simplify it because there's a lot more to it than that, but it also compresses the image, basically dumbs down the file quite a bit. On the other end of that, RAW images are literally the raw data coming off of your sensor. You're getting all of the dynamic range, you're getting all of the color depth, you're getting all of the detail. It's not processed, so it may look a little flat and may look a little bit, blah. And what's nice about that is it gives you the flexibility to take the image into post-production like Lightroom or Photoshop software and be able to really pull the most out of that image. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons of each file type so that you can get a little better feel for what you're getting into either way. Now let's start with JPEG. So if you decide to shoot JPEG, like I said before, you're going to end up having a look that's already baked into the image. So on the positive side, or the pros side, you can pretty much see what you're gonna get at the end right out of camera. You can choose a specific color style or like a black and white style inside your camera and it's gonna spit that file out looking just like what you wanted it to. JPEGs are also compressed, so you typically will end up being able to get a lot more JPEGs on your memory card and it won't eat up as much storage space on your computer or external hard drives or any of that. On the negative side, the issue that you run into with JPEGs is that they are compressed, so they don't have all of the image data. Often with JPEG images, you can experience loss of detail, loss of color data. The compression of the JPEG images also impacts how much dynamic range you can pull out of the camera as well. So you may not get as much highlight detail or as much shadow detail as you would with a RAW image. The other little caveat to keep in mind is that although those images coming out of the camera are nearly finished, often you're gonna wanna do some kind of editing to these images, and if you are shooting in JPEG, you will most likely not have as much luck when it comes to adjusting lighting or working with your highlights and shadows on a JPEG image. Now let's quickly talk about the pros and cons of shooting in RAW. RAW images, just by nature, are much larger files, more than double the size in a lot of cases, and that is just because they are capturing all of the data that the sensor captures. The positive sides of that are that you have more control in post-production, so you can pull more data out of the shadows and out of the highlights, and that is because that file contains all of that dynamic range data that came off of the sensor, so you are actually capturing all the stops of light that you were supposed to be able to with that sensor. Now, when it comes to RAW images, all of the downsides really kind of come back around to that file size. Since they are so much larger files, you do end up eating up more memory card space, more hard drive space. In some cases, your computer may have a harder time processing the images if you're working on an older system. So keep those things in mind. Depending on how much editing you want to do, you may end up wanting to go with the JPEG images. Personally, I like to be in control of everything. So if I can shoot in RAW and then I can take it into post-production and do all the edits that I want to do to bring it the most out of the image, that's the way I recommend to do it. But it's up to you. Think of it this way. If you're a person who would like to pick up a camera, turn it to the automatic mode, and just shoot pictures, JPEGs are probably more for you. More likely than not, you're looking for a quick turnaround, small file sizes, and something that's going to be convenient for you and your family. If you're the type of photographer who wants to shoot in the other shooting modes like the program mode, aperture priority, or in the manual mode specifically, if you're shooting in manual, you should probably be shooting RAW because you're putting all this work into having the control on the camera side. You should also be wanting to control what the image looks like after you've shot it. Does that make sense? So like RAW is like shooting in manual on the file side. JPEG is like shooting in full auto because you're allowing the computer to make the decisions for you. Pretty simple. Anyway, so I hope that clears up the differences between JPEG and RAW. In a future video, I will show you guys the basic workflow that I use to work through processing a RAW image. But until then, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and check this video out for more helpful tips. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Later.